as a professional shade tree mechanic. I survive off cheap tools. So when BestArc reached out to me and asked if I wanted to test out their 7th generation MIG145 multiprocess welder, I was curious to see if it had the potential to be a solid option for budget ballers. I'll start out by saying that while BestArc did send me this machine for review, all thoughts and opinions in this video are entirely my own. BestArc has no input on this video and does not get to preview it before it's posted. Okay, I've been sent the 7th generation of their MIG145, which means it's capable of flux core arc welding, stick welding, and even TIG welding, although no TIG torch is included with the machine and must be purchased separately. I'm most familiar with flux core welding, so I'll leave the stick and TIG tests to more qualified reviewers. When you open the box and remove the welder itself, you will find a thin box off to the side. Inside of it, you will find an owner's manual, as well as a ground clamp, an electrode holder for stick welding, a small spool of flux core wire, a shoulder strap, and a small bag of consumables. This is more than I was expecting to come with this machine at this price point, which was nice to see. The owner's manual provides some insight, but as you'd probably expect from a Chinese tool manual, it's not super comprehensive and some things don't make a whole lot of sense. It is definitely far from the worst I've seen though, and in most cases I would say it's good enough. It has enough general information to set up the machine and understand how it works, and the machine itself is straightforward enough that you can fill in the gaps yourself. Included in the box is a 1-pound spool of 40 thousandths wire, which should be enough to get you started. I did find it a bit strange though that they chose to include 40 thousandths wire, as opposed to 30 or 35 thousandths, which is much more common and is what I prefer to use. Either way, it'll do the job just fine, and as I stated earlier, they include all the parts you'd need to swap over any wire size you want. Loading the wire into the machine is pretty straightforward. Loosen the nut on the spool holder and put the spool of wire on the post. Pay attention to which direction the spool is going. The wire needs to be unrolling from the spool counterclockwise in order for the wire to run through the machine properly. Also, keep in mind that these wire spools are under tension, so be careful not to let go of the end of the wire. Once you get the spool on, put the nut back on and tighten it enough to put some tension on the spool so it has some resistance when rotating. Pop up the tension lever and swing the driven roller out of the way. Insert the wire through this tube, past the drive roller, and in this little hole. Push at least a few inches of the wire through, making sure that the wire is properly seated in the drive roller, and swing closed the driven roller. Now you can lower the tensioner and snap it into place. At this point, you can plug in the machine and power it on. Next to the wire feed mechanism is a small red button that will feed the wire through quickly. I recommend removing the contact tip in the gun before feeding the wire through, which can help avoid jamming. Press the button and wait for the wire to make its way through until it pops out the end of the gun. Release the button when you see the wire, at which point you can reinstall the contact tip and snip off the excess wire, leaving about 3/4 of an inch. When you first fire up the machine, you're greeted with a short boot up sequence during which the screen will flash a few times. After a few seconds, the fan will kick on and the screen will stop flashing. I can't properly express just how awesome this display and interface is on a machine at this price. It's large, easy to read, and the interface is simple to navigate. For comparison, this is my more expensive titanium 125 from Harbor Freight, and it has no screen whatsoever. But to be fair, it's easy enough to use and it does the job just fine. On the front of the machine, this button in the bottom left lets you cycle between 30, 35, and 40 thousandths wire. The button on the bottom right selects the welding process, and you can choose between MIG, which on this machine is flux core, TIG, and MMA or stick. This top left button here switches between two options called 2T and 4T. This is a feature that I was not expecting to see on a machine at this price point. If you select 2T, then the trigger on the gun works like you'd expect. It's hot when you pull the trigger and it stops when you release it. 4T means that when you pull the trigger, it will stay hot and then you pull it again to turn it off. This can be helpful for long welds or if you have any arm or wrist problems that make it hard to hold the trigger down. This machine uses what they call synergic control, which essentially means that both the voltage and wire speed are automatically determined by the machine based on the amperage you set by rotating the dial and the wire size you've selected. I found this system to work pretty well right out of the box, but you also have the option to press down the dial and set a heat offset from -30 to +30, which is an offset of plus or minus 3 volts and automatic wire speed to match, if you find yourself needing to fine-tune your heat settings. To start off, I'll try laying a flat bead on 1/8 inch plate going off the recommended settings outlined in this slightly confusing label on the underside of the lid. For 1/8 inch steel with 40 thousandths wire, the diagram says to set the amperage to 140 and the machine will take care of the rest. Interestingly enough, this is actually above what the machine is capable of. Its maximum output current is 135 amps, unless you have the 220 volt variant, which is capable of the full 145 amps. So I've just maxed out the machine at 135, which puts the voltage at 20.7. After cleaning up the welds a bit, we're able to take a look at the results. The weld itself looks nice. Flipping it over, we can see that penetration was extremely thorough and even. Realistically speaking, I'm the last person that should be seen as qualified to speak on weld quality, but from what I do know, so far I'm very impressed with what this machine is able to accomplish straight out of the box. Now I want to try a fillet weld, which is more along the lines of real-world usage. I'm still going off the settings that the machine recommends using the label under the lid, and I haven't made any adjustments for the sake of keeping this somewhat scientific. It lays down a very smooth arc with a good sound to it. Wire feed seems consistent and predictable, which I was a little bit worried about with it being automatically controlled. After cleaning it up, I'm impressed. The results speak for themselves, and penetration is acceptable, even though this 1/4 inch metal is a bit thicker than it claims to be able to handle. There are a few things that I'm not a huge fan of, like how the power cord is only about 4 feet long, which isn't even long enough to reach across my desk. However, it is the proper thickness for the power that this machine draws, which is definitely more important. Another strange thing I noticed is that the gun is a little too small to comfortably hold on to while wearing leather welding gloves. It's somewhat difficult to pull the trigger, and the rest of my fingers feel very cramped in the handle, although I have pretty large hands, so it's possible this issue is unique to me. The ground clamp that comes in the box actually isn't bad. It has full copper contacts and a copper ribbon connecting both sides. The ground cable is a decent gauge and feels adequate. The spring isn't very strong and doesn't provide a whole lot of clamping force, but considering what this machine is meant to be used for, it should be fine. I noticed the dial on the front of the unit has a small plastic pointer on it, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me given it's a digital encoder and the dial doesn't actually correlate directly to anything you see on screen. But if that bugs you, it's easy enough to cut off. It is worth noting that I haven't yet tripped the breaker on the 20 amp circuit that I'm running the machine off of, but you might not be so lucky on a 15 amp circuit. Oh, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this machine is $129 brand new on Amazon right now. You can get this machine for less than your creepy Uncle Jason spends on OnlyFans every month.
Insert cash or select payment type.
And at least this way you can lay pipe for real. As for right now, I have zero hesitation recommending this machine to anyone ranging from absolute beginner to professional shade tree mechanic. Later on, I want to get my hands on the TIG torch that is available for this machine and try my hand at some TIG welding for the first time. I've heard good things about the TIG performance of this machine, so I'm excited to have a machine that's capable of it. I just need to get some gas.